G'day guys, today we're going to be covering off the venison leg. We're going to be getting a little bit creative with it, making sure that we can utilise every muscle within the leg and also reduce down wastage. My name's James Smith and this is the Field to Plate series brought to you by Hunting and Fishing New Zealand. So first things first, we're going to go through the tools that I'm going to use to break down this venison leg today. Really simple, I'm only going to need 2 knives. First one that I'm going to use is my 5-inch curved boning knife from Victory Knives. I find a smaller knife is really good when breaking down legs. It gets into those nice tight crevices and makes it easy to go hard up against the bone, opposed to a 6-inch, which is just slightly bigger, which I like to use for my bigger animals like beef. Second knife I'm going to use today is my 10-inch curved steak knife from Victory Knives. This is really good for making nice slicing cuts, so when I'm doing my steaks and trimming any of those heavy muscles out. Alright guys, so first things first, before we start boning, we're going to go through our grips. So we can run a standard grip, which is what we've got here, otherwise we can run a dagger grip. This is what a butcher uses and it's just a bit easier to hug up against those bones. So that's what I'm going to use today. Give it a crack when boning out your venison leg. Now, the first cut that we're going to make, we're actually going to go hard up against the inside of this bone just along here. We have our top side that runs just along here, and we're going to cover that off once we take this bone out. So when I bone out, I like to just use the top tip of my knife. I don't use my whole knife because if we go all the way in, we're going to start slashing more cuts. So we just use the tip of our knife and we really stick and hug that bone. If you feel that you've come off the bone, start again. You don't want to go off the bone, otherwise, like I said, we're going to start slashing into muscles. So as long as you stick to the bone, you're pretty safe. And we're just going to stop halfway through. We can see that we've actually got a nice clean cut just down here. Okay, so we're just going to stop and have a look at that, and then we're actually going to carry on and we're actually going to bone down this whole side right there. So that's the right hand side. We're going to cover down that whole right hand side and then move through to the left. When you get to here, you get a joint. Now obviously we can't cut through that joint, so we kind of wiggle over it. Okay, so again, we're trying to stick and we're trying to get as much meat off this bone as possible. So we just kind of hold a looser grip and we wiggle over that. And then we follow all the way down to the tip of the shank. Okay, so sharp knife is key, guys, makes life a lot easier. Now that we've cleared that side, what we're going to do is we're going to do the exact same thing on the opposite side. What I like to do here, we've got our muscle called the knuckle that sits in on the top here. I actually just like to clear the flat surface on the top of this. Again, we're just getting all that meat off. And you can see there, I'm only using the tip of my knife, but I'm putting a lot of pressure on that bone. And basically that's getting under that connective tissue that connects it to the bone. So carry on down this side. Now when we get to here, there's a little knuckle, okay? It's like our kneecap. So we can actually go through that. We can go over the top of it. We can actually cut around it if we want, like so, and then go down the side. Or we can actually just joint that off. That's what I'm gonna do, and we'll actually have a better look at it. So you can see there, I've just taken that off. And we're going to carry on down the side. You can see the meat, you can obviously see that heavy white bone there, so we want to stick and move and avoid. What I always like to say too is make the meat work around you, don't work around the meat. So you can see I'm moving it around quite a lot, and I'm always cutting away from myself. I'm not cutting towards myself. Safety first. Awesome. So at this point, we've cleared both sides. Now we can see we've just got the stuff on the back. So what I like to do, as you can see, I've kind of already started to take that meat off the back of the bone, but I just grab the bottom of that shank and I basically just work my way down it, and I let gravity do its job. I'm pulling that bone up, so as I'm cutting, the meat is just falling away, and at this point we can actually just pull that off and it actually peels. So what I've done there is I've scraped up against the bone, still connected to the tissue, and I'm just pulling it and it starts seaming away off the bone. And we've just got this last little bit and we've removed our whole bone. And it's pretty clean. I mean, we've got a couple of little bits here. We can go back later and actually just trim those pieces off and add that into our mince trim pile. But that's a pretty clean bone, and that's how I remove all the bones in the lamb leg. Now that we've removed all of our bones, what we're actually going to do is we're actually going to cut and we're going to seam out every muscle, and we're actually going to cover off what we can make out of those muscles and get creative. So the first muscle that I'm going to remove is actually our rump. So it's actually a D shape, sits just inside here. So we get our bigger knife, our 10-inch curved butcher's knife, and we're just going to cut a nice smooth cut and actually remove that. We're just going to use that for steaks today. So that's our rump that sits at the tail end there. Next part we're going to remove is we're going to remove the shin part that we boned out earlier. So we're just going to seam that off. You can see the knife's doing all the work. We're not cutting hard up against it. I've got all these tendons in here that we're actually going to trim out, and we're going to keep this for our mince trim today. The next muscle that we're going to remove is our knuckle. So our knuckle sits just inside here. So again, just seaming. So by seaming, we're actually pulling and cutting at the same time. Again, so we're not cutting into the good stuff. So that's our knuckle, and today we're actually going to be making venison jerky using the knuckle with a really cool recipe. Now, last two muscles that we've got in here, we've got our top side and our silver side. So again, we can start to pull and we can start to see these seams. So all I do is just follow the seams with the tip of my knife. So top side is just there. Today we're actually going to be making schnitzel out of that. So we'll trim that out and make some schnitzel a little bit later on. This is our silver side. We also have what's called our gravy that's stuck on the side here. We're going to, again, following what we've done earlier, just seam these muscles out. So I'm pulling and just making light cuts. Pulling and making light cuts. So again, we can cut this, and this is a really good casserole steak, so we can actually dice that up or keep it whole and low and slow cook it. We have our silver side here. We also have, on our silver side, we have our eye round that runs down the side. So again, we'll seam that out. Cool, and then we have our silver side, which you can actually pump and make venison corn silver side, which is super tasty, but today we're just gonna trim it out and we're gonna use it for mince trim. So preparing our knuckle to make jerky is quite simple. What we're gonna do is just remove this little bit of cartilage bone here, that kneecap bone that we talked about earlier. And what we do is we actually just pull this cap that sits on the top, and actually just get our finger under it and actually just pull that off until we get to the end. Then we're gonna slice it. We actually have a little muscle that sits just under it, just along this line here. Actually just get the tip of my knife, trim this out. Again, all the stuff we're going to be utilising, we're going to be mincing later on. So we just keep a nice pile or a freezer bag ready, and then we're just going to go along and we're just going to take the silver skin off this as well. So silver skin, I like to keep one pile, and I actually trim that out again and just remove that silver skin. I don't like to put the silver skin into my mince trim. Just makes it a little bit tough and chewy. Cool, so what we're going to do when we make venison jerky, we want to make sure that it's not too thick but not too thin. So I usually like to go somewhere between 1.5 centimeters and 2 centimeters thick. Okay, this seems to be the ideal amount that it can actually soak in all those good flavors, and then it doesn't take too long to cook on our smoker. So we're going to go ahead and start slicing those nice thin slices all the way down to the end. Cool, now that our knuckle is trimmed up, it's been sliced, it's ready to go in our Ziploc bag with our jerky marinade. So my favorite jerky marinade is 1/2 cup of soy sauce, 3 tablespoons of Worcester sauce, 3 tablespoons of liquid honey, 1 tablespoon of sriracha sauce, 2 teaspoons of onion powder, and 1 teaspoon of cracked pepper. Awesome, so I've smoked my venison jerky on the Traeger grills for 2 hours. Now we're ready to pull it out, let it cool down, and we're ready to enjoy that tasty jerky goodness that we've made. So now we're going to turn our top side into schnitzel. So the first thing that I do is I actually take this little cap off the top of the top side. So again, like we've done, we're just going to seam that muscle off. And like we have with everything else, all this stuff is going to be going in a trim pile and used for mince later on. We just take this heavy fat off the outside. Again, that's just going to go in our trim pile. Flip it over, a little vein that sits in here, so we just trim that out. So once our top side is all trimmed up, what I like to do is I just face that first piece off, nice clean cut, and then I cut them about 1 inch thick. Okay, I know schnitzel isn't usually 1 inch thick, so we're going to cover that off soon, how we turn it into schnitzel from this point. I actually put them inside a Glad ready bag, fold it over, and we tenderize it. So we can slice them really thin, but because the top side isn't a huge muscle within venison, what I like to do is, cut it and then tenderize it, and it flattens it out and makes a really nice big schnitzel. So tenderizer, if you don't have a tenderizer, rolling pin is fine. And then we have a nice schnitzel, and it's going to be super tender because we've tenderized it, and it's also thin enough to fast fry. So today we're just using the simple method of flour, egg, and breadcrumbs for our schnitzel. Cool, so with our remaining cuts, we're gonna trim out for our mince trim. So whenever I'm mincing my venison mince, I always like to add at least 30% of pork meat as well, just so it adds in a nice bit of moisture and flavor to our venison, because our venison is quite a lean protein. So when adding that pork, it just adds flavor, also perfect for making sausages and patties. Cool guys, so that's my take on how to utilize every muscle in the venison leg. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Field to Plate series, brought to you by Hunting and Fishing New Zealand.